we gather together, as we gather together on Halloween. The houses have all been decorated with skeletons and ghosts and vampires and bats and black cats. And tonight, the wild rumpus will begin as the neighborhood kiddies in their costumes will beat their way to our doors with great expectation, asking for and getting candy. I can recall my own childish excitement as October 1st rolled around each year, and my little group of friends and I would plan what we were going to be for Halloween. And my mother would always be as excited as we were. When I was 9, she decided that I would be what is now a most unpolitically correct term. She decided that I would be a hobo. So she put Vaseline on my face and stuck in coffee grounds to make it look like beard stubble. And it was completely gross, and it made me feel miserable the whole time. But she loved it, and she was so happy with her own cleverness. And my own kids love Halloween as much as we did, because the holiday, whatever its origin, is just plain and simple fun, passed on from generation to generation. So we know that lots of things get passed down through the generations. I'm sure you all saw the commercial about the young woman who inherited the gene for breast cancer along with her mother's recipe or her grandmother's recipe for tomato sauce. And in my own family, I learned from death certificates on Ancestry that my great-grandmother and my great-great-grandmother had the same mitral valve issues that I had. So some people are more interested in generational remembrances and retention of the things of the past than others. My sister, for instance, gave her daughter a beautiful dining room set that belonged to my sister's mother-in-law dating from 1902. And my niece decided that she didn't like it, and she replaced it with some fake wood table from IKEA, which totally upset my sister, who then loaned it to us. So now this beautiful table and this beautiful, what would you call it, a break front or whatever, is in our dining room. And if we don't want it or we move someplace, we have to give it back to her. My son, Greg, and his wife, Mo, are throwbacks to just about any generation. So when they go out, they get dressed up in period clothes, and their whole house is filled with antiques. They have those old-fashioned, I don't know, horsehair or felt sofas with the legs that we all had, most of us had when we were kids. And when we moved, we gave them my grandmother's bedroom set, which probably dates back to the early 20th century. So when I find random things like my father's discharge papers from the Army, or a picture of my maternal grandfather and his 11 siblings, I give it to them because I know they will safekeep it. Well, they probably, I don't know, throw it out. So one of the weirdest things that we ever acquired from the past was a deed dating back to 1799 that probably spent in the home of Larry's grandfather, and then in his sister Rose, and his father, and then his sister Rose. So it seems to relate to one of William Penn's estates and appears to be signed by James Wilson, who's a signer of the Declaration of Independence. And we have absolutely no idea how his grandfather got this deed. And he kept it in his little row house in South Philly. So the acquisition of this historical deed by an Italian immigrant is as random as the acquisition of a harmful deed. So how do these really weird things happen? How does one child develop a profound sense of the past while others would totally dismiss it and would throw things away without even thinking about it? How? Because there's really no answer to why. Do some bad genes devastate generations in one family, intimately acquainting them with grief, pain, and sorrow, while other families remain completely unscathed? I don't know about you, but the splendid array of living things in the world does make me think. Is life random, or is it built gene by gene and cell by cell, a map of being laid out from the very beginning by God? If so, are we and all things, including the lethal genes, predetermined by God? Regardless of Augustine and Calvin, and the Calvinists, Genesis says emphatically, no. Regardless of our place and time in family and culture, we have a choice because otherwise we would have no free will. But that freedom, at least to me, seems to be constrained by randomness and sometimes costs dearly. For instance, because of medical advances in surgery in the 21st century, I was able to survive the mitral valve failure that seriously weakened my great-grandmother and killed her in her early 50s in the 1930s. And random occurrences, like meeting people, both good and bad, accidents, illnesses, and youthful mistakes can derail what appears to be even the best way forward. Life is fragile, and things can fall apart so easily for even the smartest, the strongest, the holiest, the most spiritual, and the richest. The random expression of genes and unfortunate accidents in the world and our ability to survive them or not should humble us all and open our eyes and our hearts to those whose lives have been much more difficult and problematic than our own. And what might have been true and meaningful and necessary for us in our lives might not necessarily be true and meaningful and necessary in the lives of others who experience the exact same thing. We, our thoughts, our feelings are not the measure of all things. And hearts opened wide to God through prayer and study enable this type of insight and should make us empathetic and charitable in our judgment as to why people do the things they do. The old saying, "There but for the grace of God go I," is less a statement about God's favor, a heresy if there ever was one, and more a catch of the breath, pounding of the heart, a dumb moment when we realize how really close we are to one another, how we are separated by a cell, a second, a minute, a place, time, or a generation. So in the end, or at the end, we are and always have been one with every person, leaf, flower, mountain, sea, bird, indeed with the stuff of stars, because everything exists forever in God, in whom we live and move and have our being. Poets, mystics, visionaries, and prophets in every age and every culture also disagree that there is any randomness or separation in the universe. Instead, the wise among us have always written about the unity of creation and our equal belovedness in God. The 16th century poet John Donne, who wrote "Death Be Not Proud," also wrote, "No man is an island entire of itself." From the 14th century mystic Julian of Norwich, she instructs us so beautifully, "We are all one in love. When I look at myself as an individual, I see that I am nothing. It is only in unity with my fellow spiritual seekers that I am anything at all. It is this foundation that will save humanity." So she said that in the 14th century. 19th century poet Alfred Tennyson wrote that we are a part of all we have met. And indeed, we are parts of genes, customs, values, ethics, and morals that we have inherited from our family of origin. Our ancestors bequeathed these to us, and we will bequeath them to our descendants. And for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, we are a part of our ancestors, and our descendants will be a part of us. The unity of creation does not, of course, eliminate pain or suffering. As Richard Moore wrote so beautifully, and I don't think he writes any other way, for those of you who follow Richard, like every day to me is a revelation. We should not be surprised by our frailty or our woundedness, some of which belong to our ancestors, this pain that we carry throughout our journeys. And these wounds of life did not come from God, because God is the original blessing. And it did not come through some weird and unbiblical idea called original sin. Woundedness comes with the territory that we call life. And so we, like those who went before us and those who will come after us, will muddle through our lives as they are, the past mixed with the present, walking mostly blind into the future with all the randomness that it may hold, with faith and hope that with God's grace and a lot of hard work and prayer and study, we will eventually be the human beings, the best human beings that we could possibly be, our true selves, the part of us that looks like and acts like God. And this, my brothers and sisters, is how we help creation to sing. So I often let homilies marinate in my head for a while before I actually commit them to paper. And I have all these little ideas that I jot down here and there and other places. So last week, I was sitting in my living room and I was suddenly gobsmacked by the circle of life that are displayed on the walls. So on one wall is a picture of all my children and my grandchildren. And on the other wall is a picture of my mother and father on their wedding day in 1950. And my paternal grandparents, probably around 1900, my haughty grandmother in her fashionable Gibson girl upsweep, and my grandfather in his derby hat. Born in 1884 and 1876, respectively. In this picture, they are quite obviously dating and quite fashionable. My youngest grandchild was born in 2018. So 5 generations and 145 years of love and life surround me in that room. In spite of all that went before and that what will come after, not one of us would be who we are without all the others. And so, as we reflect upon the saints and the sinners in our family, all of whom rest in the ample arms of our Mother God, let us recall with fondness the haughty dragon ladies like that grandmother, and the dudes like my grandfather, the rascals and the over-imbibers, the dismal and the depressed, the sunny and the hopeful, the peaceful and the argumentative, all of whom have made us who we are today. And in that, let us rejoice and be glad.